Hello, do we have another person?
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to start by acknowledging that we're on the traditional territory of the Kwalindun First Nation and the Taan Quechin Council. This is a stressful time for Yukoners, for business owners and employees facing hardship and anxiety. I'm sure that we're all experiencing a mix of emotions that may be difficult to express. It's important that we continue to support each other and remember that collaboration and kindness are what makes Yukon strong. Circumstances are evolving, and as we learn more and evaluate, we are responding. The government of Yukon is continuing to identify new support systems to provide for Yukoners in need during this pandemic. We have been collaborating with the Government of Canada to coordinate on how to best help Yukoners. And the Department of Economic Development, our main priority at this time is providing critical resources to support Yukon's economy. This includes our recent changes to the Yukon nominee program, as well as the recently implemented paid sick leave rebate program. I'm here today to announce the next funding program that our department is providing to businesses. The government of Yukon is now offering the temporary support for events funding program. This program is designed to help those businesses that had made investments for large-scale events in Yukon that couldn't take place because of COVID-19. The events funding program is specifically intended to reduce losses involving perishable goods or the cancellation of accommodation and services that cannot be recovered. As an example of this would be a restaurant that purchased much higher amount of food supplies ahead of the Arctic Winter Games or the Yukon Native Hockey Tournament that may have then gone to waste. Other examples could include advertising expenses for the event, service bookings, contracts with vendors, or the cost of hiring new staff specifically in preparation for the event. This program applies to any event canceled due to COVID-19 between March 7th and July 31st that was expected to have more than 50 participants. It is important to note that these expenses must have occurred before the Chief Medical Officer of Health made recommendations to ban gatherings of over 50 people on March 16th. Eligible businesses are also required to make efforts to return supplies, cancel contracts, and limit losses before applying for this program. Funding will be available to cover up to 100% of these irretrievable losses. While the loss of these large gatherings is disappointing to all Yukoners, the negative impact is especially heavy for businesses that invested in these preparations. The program will reduce some of their burden during a period that is already hurting Yukon's businesses. As I mentioned earlier, circumstances are evolving, and as we learn more and evaluate, we are responding. We are listening to the Business Advisory Council and continuing to address the challenges our economy is facing. The Department of Economic Development will keep working with local businesses and adapt as we navigate this changing economic landscape. The newly formed Business Advisory Council are in direct contact with Yukon businesses and our comprehensive surveys measuring the impact of COVID-19 all inform our government's response. These relationships are important and are helping to guide how we address the impacts of COVID-19. In closing, I'd like to remind all Yukoners to continue to follow the recommendations of the Chief Medical Officer of Health, maintain social distancing and regular hand washing. And I understand the Chief Medical Officer of Health will be addressing us here shortly, so I won't take up too much more time, but open to questions on our announcement today or concerning the economy in general.
I'll start us here. We'll start in the room.
I just wanted to ask, two First Nations have come forward. White River First Nation has called for a cease of mining activity across the territory, particularly in their traditional territories. Nacho Dun has asked for a temporary halt to prospecting and staking in their traditional territories. Will you stop mining?
First of all, Julian, thank you for that question. And I think it's important for us as Yukoners to ensure that we have accurate facts on these situations. So I first, over the last couple of weeks, but I mean, primarily when the announcement was made by the Chief Medical Officer that anybody coming into the Yukon, whether they're working in construction or they're working in retail or they're working in mining, had an obligation to self-isolate for 14 days. And actually, there's a lot of Yukoners that work in Northern British Columbia. They're local companies that do work there in the mining sector. And even those individuals that were working in Northern BC, as soon as they came into the Yukon, were directed to go directly home and self-isolate for 14 days. So I only bring that up because it's an important fact. There's been some op-eds in the newspaper. There's been conversations on social media. And in all of those cases, the facts were skewed. It said that the mining sector was getting a special pass, and that's not correct. Anybody coming into our territory has been directed by the Chief Medical Officer to self-isolate for 14 days. The two operating mines, Minto Mine and Victoria Gold, have taken this conversation and the measures extremely seriously. They have both hired medical consulting firms that work in the industrial field, and those individuals have been in contact with the Chief Medical Officer. Now, I did an interview earlier today on CBC and I used the word complex, and it's probably not fair to Yukoners to just say it's complex and not delineate that. So let me give just a few examples, and I will, to answer your point. There's an overarching conversation here about how we can't let individuals come in the mining sector into our territory because it's going to put us at more risk. So first of all, again, anybody coming into this territory, no matter what their field of work, have that obligation to ensure they're healthy people. And that's something we've shared with that industry, and we'll share it with all industries. But we also have Yukoners that are my neighbors and your neighbors, and some of them are prospectors, some of them are placer miners. And in that case, those individuals may be on their house, in their house in Porter Creek or Copper Ridge or Haines Junction. They're healthy people, and they're not in self-isolation, and they're going to go out to their claim and set up their wall tent or their trailer and stay out there and work. And that's what they want to do. And so that's the complexity of it. To say that we got to make sure that nobody else comes into this territory and doesn't mine would make it a very difficult piece, because there's a ton of Yukoners that are going to get ready to want to go and do their work, and they're safe. There has been some people in the industry, primarily, and I touched on it today, some placer miners that have come to the Yukon and have not followed the rules that have been outlined. And I say to them, a small group of people are causing a lot of fear and discomfort in our territory. So follow the rules. They're very clear. Self-isolate for 14 days. Don't put communities like Dawson on alert because of that. As for Nacho Dun, I spoke with Chief Mervyn this morning, and we talked about the resolution that had been passed. the First Nation Chief and Council passed a resolution and stated they wanted to ensure that there was a cease of activity on their settlement lands. And I heard that loud and clear. And they are ensuring, and they've been communicating with people that mine in that region, and they've been sharing that information, saying that that's their position. What I heard today was that there's some concerns in their community and from their First Nation about how to ensure, as we go forward, that the proper steps are in place and the proper measures are in place to ensure that their community is safe. And they still have some concerns. I can say that my colleagues that are here with us in cabinet are moving very quickly, and we're probably going to hear about some measures very soon. I won't preempt that, but I will say very soon. And I think that that's going to lead to some more comfort around ensuring we keep people safe. I think for anybody in the sector, whether you're a prospector or you're a placer miner, what you have to understand is people in all of our rural communities are very uncomfortable at this point. If you are, at this time, we have not suspended that exploration activity. Get your materials, get your supplies, go to where you need to work away from people, and understand that all of our small communities are at a heightened alert right now because of this. So I felt that we had a good conversation. I felt that myself and my colleagues have some work to do to ensure that we have, and we work with industry to get to the right place concerning the comments in Action Night done. Concerning the letter from White River First Nation, which was really structured to talk about their traditional territory, but it also was supporting National Done. In that case, again, I think that we, have heard their position. Well, I have, but the complexity is this: White River First Nation has asserted traditional territory that goes and overlaps Trondikawichan, Kawanni First Nation, Selkirk First Nation, and Little Salmon Carmacks. So in all those cases, we're going to continue to work with those other 4 nations. I have not had any direct communication from the other 4 nations about how they want to see activities undertaken. I do know that in the case of Minto, they have had, as I've been informed, appropriate and respectful communication with Selkirk First Nation, and they work on their traditional territory. I know that Minto had made a decision to pay the employees that are from Selkirk First Nation and Little Salmon Carmacks First Nation and let them go home at this time. So I have read the letter and I've saw it on social media, and then I did receive it as well from White River First Nation. And I would say at this point, we are not suspending mining because I am following the direction of the Chief Medical Officer. But I really think it's important when people are putting stuff on social media, or they're, like I saw it today quickly after my interview, understand the facts. The facts are that people are directed, whether they're in construction or retail, or they're an accountant that's traveling into our territory. They have to self-isolate for 14 days. Our prerogative is health and safety first. So I know that's a very long answer, but I think that it's really been time to have this discussion and to ensure that the people that are in those communities are healthy. And we're going to continue to work. I know the Premier had a call with multiple First Nations leaders today. And I think over the next couple of days, we're going to see some measures that are going to be able to give some more comfort to people.
I just have a quick follow-up, and I want to know what is going into the decision to keep mines operating like Eagle Gold?
Again, there's a series of different, and thank you for that question, because there is a number of industries at this particular time, whether it's construction or it's mining or it's, you name it, where we've identified as these are essential services. It doesn't mean that people they get a pass, which has been talked about in our community, that these individuals don't have to self-isolate for 14 days. So right now, what's happened is the Chief Medical Officer has done a fabulous job of having to compile a lot of data very quickly to have a look at all the different activity in our territory, and to say these particular activities they don't get a special pass. Like they essentially have to do self-isolation. So there's not a differentiate. We're not differentiating between Victoria Gold, a prospector, or somebody building a house. These are activities that are happening at this particular time until we hear otherwise. So I think that thank you for asking me those questions. And once again, I urge anybody who's going to, go on social media, write to the newspaper, whatever you may do, please, let's have the facts there. And because when we don't, it definitely causes fear in our communities.
Hi, it's Cam Heek, Government of Yukon. Just had one of the journalists with Whitehorse Star was having some challenges getting through our landline, so she's asked me to ask a question on her behalf.
Okay.
The question is, does funding cover the cost of anticipated profits? For example, canceled hotel room bookings. If businesses are asked to cancel contracts before applying, so are those contractors also eligible to apply for funding? I can repeat it if you'd like.
On the announcement today, I think, Kim, I would say it's the real focus is irretrievable costs. And I think that's a key statement in what we're talking about. It is decisions that were made on particular items, whether they were perishable or there was money spent on marketing your event, and also as an NGO, some of the costs that you might have laid out. So I think in the case of, I believe, some accommodations, and in the case of our local airline, they're in a position to be able to apply. I mean, there's still a rigor that will happen, and there's a criteria we'll go through. But really, I think it's important to go through the application process. But really, that's the goal of this. I mean, we made an announcement very early on that talked about the cancellation of the Arctic Winter Games, and we also felt it was fair to encompass other events. What I will share for the media is if you need to get your process started for your application, and that can start today, the phone number to call is 456-3803. Our toll-free number for the Department of Economic Development is 1-800-661-0408, extension 3803. And the email address is ecdev@gov.yk.ca. So please begin to, if you meet the criteria that we've talked about today, or you are an organization, please start that process at this point in time.
Okay, and on behalf of Gabriel, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
We'll go to the phone now, starting with Yukon News. Gord, do you have a question?
Yes. Could there be any enforcement or monitoring of mines that are not, I guess, cooperating, or miners that aren't cooperating with the self-isolation orders?
Gord, when it comes to the two producing mines that are in the Yukon, Minto Mine and Victoria Gold, what we have seen has been great respect for the 14-day isolation process and following through on what the Chief Medical Officer has prescribed. Shortly after, I believe it was the 22nd of March, and I'm sorry if I'm off by a day, was at the point where the Chief Medical Officer was a Sunday and really defined that 14-day rule. The day after that announcement, Minto Mine had, I believe, 30 people fly into the Yukon. And in that particular situation, we spoke with their team and their management team, and they were ready to move their individuals into their mine. And we clearly explained the rules that were in place, and absolutely they followed it. Those individuals, some of those individuals went home, and other individuals have been in self-isolation since that point in time. And The same with Victoria Gold. I think there was 2 or 3 people they had that they needed on site, and we again had to communicate to them that those individuals have to be. So in both of those cases of our producing mines, we've been very comfortable with the respect to the self-isolation and the rules that are in place. Where we have seen some challenges has been around the very few bad actors around on the placer mining side of things. I think it's important to commend the Klondike Placer Miners Association and their president, who's a Dawsonite, Will Fellers, individuals who are working with the municipality on a daily basis to ensure that people follow the appropriate rules, people that had come into the Yukon. So I think, in both of those cases, that's what we've realized on the ground. When it comes to exploration, a lot of that work has not happened yet. And in many cases, some of that early work would be done by Yukoners. What we're really seeing is a trend across the entire industry where people are on hold because of, I don't think we have to get into the reasons why. We all know why. So at this point, we've been very comfortable with our producing mines. I do think it's important to share 2 other pieces of information today. One is that we do have sites that are where there's reclamation undertaken, whether it be Faro, Quetzal River, Wolverine, Mount Nansen. And in all of those cases, we need people on site to ensure the health and safety of our environment. In many cases, they're treating water. We're moving towards spring freshet, and that's going to have a series of other challenges. So it's important to know when people talk about, again, mining, in some cases, we have people that are doing environmental work in those particular sites, and we're going to need to have people there as well. I think it's also, the other point I would say is when people talk about our bigger producing mines, and some comments have been made by individuals in our community to say, just shut it down. It doesn't, as we all know, it doesn't just shut down. You don't turn the lights off and leave an operation of that size. There is still an obligation to have people on the ground. There's still an obligation to have other types of work done. So it's not like we can just leave a particular site and nobody will be there until this is over. In any case, there's going to be people there. It's depending on what type of activity they're going to be undertaking while they're there.
All right, we'll go to Tim, CQRW.
Hello, Minister Pillai. I just wanted to get some reaction from you. There's some staggering numbers coming out of the Whitehorse Chamber of Commerce, a business survey that they did toward the end of last month. That 88% of respondents felt some level of impact on their business. 52% said that they had hoped to weather the situation. And the figures sticks out for me. 7% of the businesses that responded said that at the end of April, they pretty much weren't going to make it. Just your reaction to those numbers in the survey.
Yeah, the numbers that are coming in, whether it be the Whitehorse Chamber or the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, Canadian Chamber of Commerce, they're all very bleak. So, not shocked. I think for many, there's just a tremendous amount of entrepreneurs in our community that are living this right now and are looking for the measures that are going to provide them with some hope. When I look at what's played out, I think maybe, Tim, the most valuable thing I can do is, touch upon what our strategy is for this. And that really focuses first and foremost, we're trying to ensure that we don't duplicate the efforts of the federal government. And so what we've watched is we've seen the loan program, and we know that is it's still going to take a little bit of time to get that out the door in this month, is what we've heard. We think that that's a valuable tool, not for everybody, but for some. We know that there has been this emergency, and I apologize, I'm not using the proper terminology, but there's a program in place through the federal government to provide people with a bit of a salary, especially even entrepreneurs that are not eligible for unemployment insurance. And so I think that that's a really important piece of this. And then we know that a very substantial investment was made around the wage subsidy, which is going to help some, but not everybody. So those are the three key items. For those many businesses that you touched on, Tim, that are saying at the end of April, we're in a very difficult position. My message today is this. We, as a government, we are very aware that today was rent day and the additional pressures. I asked the landlords of commercial tenants to sit with your tenants, communicate with your tenants, and provide some flexibility if you can. And I know that's not for everybody, but if you can, sit down and come up with a plan. Secondly, I say to the entrepreneurs that are in the community, it's really, we hear you loud and clear. Our business advisory group met on Friday. There was some recommendations that I received on Sunday night, and it's really focused on fixed costs. And we've been looking that over and trying to define a set of measures that can work with that. The magnitude of this for us is we think it's as high as 4,000 businesses that potentially we have to work with. That could be the high number on this one. And what we did today was an announcement. It's been about 15 days since we all sat in a room and the Arctic Winter Games were canceled, and we pondered if that was a good decision. Now we're in a much different world just a short 3 weeks later. So this commitment today and moving money into the economy was part of that early piece. That might seem like a lifetime ago, but this is work we committed to and we wanted to get done. So to Tim, I would say when people are sitting there today, probably in a pretty difficult position, because I've heard from a tremendous amount of small businesses, entrepreneurs, the personal services sector, you name it. I would say, please, before you make any significant decisions right now, please contemplate the fact that there's more measures coming from the government. We are working lockstep with CanNor to understand, and the federal government to understand what they're going to put in place and what we can put in place. And our teams are working tirelessly to ensure that we have those pieces. So we're not there yet. It's going to take a little bit of time. I'm sorry that I have to say it's going to take a little bit of time, but that's the reality of where all of us are right now. This is moving so quick, and the work is tremendous amount of work to do to get it right, or even to get it partially right is probably where we'll land.
All right, we're running short on time, so I'll cycle through the other members on the phone. We have Claudiane. Do you have a question for the minister?
One thing about the mining that I am kind of curious about is for some workers, fly in, fly out, coming from other jurisdictions, they are running into situations where they may not be able to go back or be able to leave. Are there concerns that perhaps the mining sector might not be able to operate properly because of the restrictions on traveling across the country?
Yeah, I'm just pausing because I'm trying to think of exact and specific situations, Claudiane, that I can speak to. I think, again, for the two producing mines in the Yukon, I think that they're very clear on what needs to be done when people get here, where they're coming from across the country. So in those cases, yes, I think that there's concern. I think there's concern in every industry in our country about supply chain, materials needed to do the work, and the gaps in capacity to do it well. So I think our mining industry right now is as well. They're respecting what's playing out, and they're also it's a day-to-day thing for many cases. So I don't see it in a scenario where we're going to have people potentially stuck in the Yukon. I do see a number of different sectors of our economy that are going to have people come to the Yukon, and those people are going to have to self-isolate like any other individual that comes here.
And we'll go to our final question. Just a reminder to media that Dr. Brendan Hanley will speak after this. So our final reporter on the phone is Chris with CBC.
I'm just here for the next guy.
We'll wrap it up at that then.
I have
Thank
a
you.
question, Laurent Boréal.
Oh, yep, go ahead, please. Go ahead, please.
Okay, so this is a question regarding the temporary support event funding. So there are two questions actually. The first one is, why did you choose the date of the July 27th for that funding? You said it would be for events from March 27 to July, March 7 to July 27th. So how did you decide a date in July? And then the other question is that funding apply? Does that funding apply as well for NGOs or only for businesses? Sorry, I figured that I would ask that question in English, not in French.
Repeat it and just confirm your question is, why was the date range selected as it was? And also, why are NGOs included?
If they're included.
If NGOs are included?
Okay. I think I can answer both questions. I think the answer to your first question, well, maybe a bit vague. I mean, the time period of what becomes an eligible expense is based on, of course, the announcement by the chief medical officer and understanding at that point how things changed. I believe that the Department of Economic Development felt that under the current circumstances and understanding the time frame we're working at, that between now and the end of July really encompassed sort of this period that's really affected by COVID-19 as we understand it now. The second question is, yes, NGOs are eligible for this, for expenses that they incurred for events, and I urge them to reach out to the Department of Economic Development.
Thanks. We'll wrap that here and move on to Dr. Brendan Hanley. Thanks.
Great. Thank you.